Leicester City, Wilfred Ndidi. I often criticize guys I don't particularly like, but this is mostly because Wilfred Ndidi has high expectations and I don't want him to disappoint me. To suggest that he has fallen short of those goals this year would be a tragic understatement, as I don't believe any other Premier League player has dropped off more than him this season. Despite just being 26 years old, Ndidi has already played almost 250 games for the Foxes after being acquired by Leicester from Genk for £17 million back in January 2017. In the last year, it would have been difficult to find a top 6 side that wouldn't have signed him unless they valued him at more than £60 million. His game has lacked passion this year, his determination seems to have vanished, and he's lost the ability to tackle. In fact, he hasn't made a single tackle in any of his last 3 Premier League games, while doing that just once in his previous 5 Premier League matches. Even if they all had particularly subpar seasons, Jamie Vardy, Danny Ward and Kieran Dewsbury-Hall cannot compare to that of Ndidi. Liverpool, Fabinho. Thanks to an excellent end, Liverpool's disastrous season has been reduced to just being terrible. But not everyone has avoided embarrassment. Virgil van Dijk and Joel Gomez have consistently failed to live up to expectations during much of the year, but Trent Alexander-Arnold has finally pulled himself together with a new position at the conclusion of the campaign and is delivering some of his finest work. Fabinho, at least in my opinion, has been the most disappointing of all. Following his £39 million transfer from Monaco, he was one of the most brilliant defensive midfielders in Europe throughout his first 4 seasons at Anfield. Fabinho showed some concerning indicators toward the conclusion of last season, but nothing that could have foreshadowed what would happen during the first 80 to 90% of this season, in my opinion. Liverpool's midfield appeared to be extremely vulnerable, as Fabinho was only a shell of his former self, leading some to speculate that he may be out of the club forever. In recent games, he has very belatedly begun to exhibit signs of his previous self. If he can return to his best, it will help Liverpool's recruitment conundrum in the summer, but for now that is still a huge if. Manchester City, Calvin Phillips. It's not uncommon for new players to struggle and receive a lot of criticism their first season at Manchester City before adjusting to Pep Guardiola's expectations and thriving the following season. That was demonstrated by Jack Grealish this season, by Ilkay Gundogan before him, and by players like John Stones and Nathan Ake, who took a little longer but have been so strong this year. Despite Pep declaring Phillips unfit before Christmas, I think Phillips will play a lot more football next season. A dishonorable mention should probably go to Cancelo, who was perhaps the finest fullback in the world last season, but was infamously ditched by Pep in January, primarily for non-football reasons. Manchester United, Jadon Sancho. Manchester United has had a remarkable season, and by remarkable, I don't necessarily mean incredibly excellent or horrible. It's incredible that they lost 4-0 to Brentford, 6-3 to Manchester City, 7-0 to Liverpool, won the EFL Cup, beat Barcelona, lost to Sevilla, and experienced Cristiano Ronaldo drama all in the same season, with an FA Cup final yet to come. To be honest, Cristiano Ronaldo could have easily made the list for the Red Devils, but I'll stick with the current member of the team. If you polled a sample of Manchester United supporters to determine who their least impressive player this season has been, Harry Maguire, Anthony, Wout Weghorst, and Anthony Martial would all come up fairly highly. However, I believe that expectations for Maguire had already been lowered. Anthony is making his debut season. Weghorst had already struggled at Burnley, and we should have learned by now not to have high expectations for Anthony Martial. After his debut season last year, you could say the same about Jadon Sancho, but I still think he's a wonderful footballer, and I can't quite believe how little of it we've seen this season. During the 2019-20 season, the £73 million player played 44 games for Borussia Dortmund and contributed 20 goals and 20 assists. In 37 games this season, he has 6 goals and 2 assists. Sancho is still only 23 years old, but it is obvious that something is wrong with him at Old Trafford. It may be unavoidable that the two of them split ways at this time, and it would be best for both sides. Newcastle United, Anthony Gordon. Before Newcastle United supporters slam me for this in the comments, let me add that yes, he is young, yes, he has only been in the team for 4 months, and yes, it is very conceivable that he may break out next season. Gordon's inclusion is primarily due to Newcastle's exceptional performance this season, which has far exceeded expectations, and I don't believe that the team has had a clear failure. Ryan Fraser may say that Eddie Howe, his former Bournemouth manager, pushed him to practice with the reserves, which isn't ideal, but were there really any high expectations for him going into the season? In the end, Gordon ultimately cost Newcastle between £40 and £45 million, and while their owners would spend that kind of money without thinking twice, in the context of Premier League football, it is a sizable amount of money. It means that Gordon's performances will be more scrutinized than Matt Ritchie or Dan Burns, for example. He has accomplished nothing thus far, and although I am aware that this may change, it is not the criteria, and due to a lack of options he must be included. Nottingham Forest. Jesse Lingard. When you spend £200 million on a whole new team of players, there are bound to be a number of failures at Nottingham Forest this season, but none more significant than Jesse Lingard. Despite the fact that Lingard is frequently misrepresented, his enormous salaries at Forest were widely publicized over the summer. Nevertheless, there was every reason to believe that he could justify them, since Lingard had no transfer fee, and in only 16 Premier League games during his half-season at West Ham, he had scored 9 goals and provided 6 assists. However, Lingard hasn't done anything this season to help Nottingham Forest's chances of surviving. Lingard has made an astonishingly 0 goals and 0 assists in his 17 Premier League appearances. Dishonorable mentions go to Chris Wood, who only made 7 games before suffering a thigh injury that forced him to miss the remainder of the season, Jonjo Shelvey, Remo Freuler, and Emmanuel Dennis. Southampton. Mislav Orich. Southampton sealed a £6 to £8 million deal for Mislav Orich in January, although they were already firmly entrenched in a relegation battle, making it one of the Premier League's most bizarre purchases this season. At age 30, Orich was not a person for the future, but rather someone who could have an immediate influence. Orich had been outstanding for Dinamo Zagreb throughout the previous 3.5 years, and in the first half of this season, he had already contributed to 21 goals from 28 games. After 4 months, Dinamo Zagreb is reportedly in discussions to sign Orich, despite the Saints frantically seeking to recoup as much of that money as they can. Since his arrival, Orich has made just one 6-minute cameo appearance in the Premier League, which is very remarkable considering how Southampton's starting lineup hasn't exactly been doing particularly well. Paul Onuachu, Sukumara, and Adam Armstrong received dishonorable mentions. Tottenham Hotspur. Richarlison. Okay, good. I retract all of my comments on Wilfred Ndidi and Neil Maupay. Richarlison, who was signed by Spurs for a reported £60 million in the summer, but has only scored 1 Premier League goal and whose stock has dropped the most, is without a doubt the easiest player to include on this list, and the one whose reputation has suffered the most. Halfway through the season, he claimed that the season had been a waste of time, and Antonio Conte responded by confirming that Richarlison had really played poorly this year. Richarlison is someone I like quite a bit, and unlike some people, I don't believe he is a blatant fake who is terrible at football, but this season he has been awful. Dishonorable mentions goes to Hugo Lloris and Heung-min Son. West Ham. Gianluca Scamacca. Gianluca Scamacca has a slight Sebastian Haller vibe about him, therefore it wouldn't be a surprise if he found success elsewhere after leaving West Ham. Scamacca wasn't a cheap acquisition for the Hammers, who signed him last summer for a cost of over £30 million and might reach £35.5 million with add-ons. This is due to the fact that, despite being only 23 years old, he scored 16 goals for Sassuolo the previous season, being outscored by only 5 other players in the Italian league. Scamacca looked to suit David Moyes' ideal striker profile down to the letter with his height, power and aerial skill, but things haven't quite turned out that way. Scamacca has only been able to score 3 goals in 16 Premier League games thus far, despite missing 3 months of the season due to knee injury, including the entire past 2 months. Forwards frequently need a season to adjust to a new league, language, and environment, but Scamacca features slightly ahead of Tomas Soucek, who has also been incredibly disappointing this year. Thilo Kehrer isn't included in this list if you are wondering, since I've never rated him highly, and if anything he's probably been somewhat slightly better than I anticipated while still being fairly poor. Wolves. Gonçalo Guedes. Wolves have had a generally disappointing season, and they have deteriorated from last year, but have changed drastically since Julen Lopetegui took over in November. Many Wolves players, including Raul Jimenez, who hasn't scored a single Premier League goal, as well as Johnny and Pablo Sarabia, both of whom I highly regard as players, but have disappointed, especially Sarabia, who I thought was a great signing in January, have been fairly unimpressive this season. However, Gonçalo Guedes, who cost Wolves a lot of money and was awful before being permitted to join Benfica on loan, ensures that everyone involved escapes without a scratch. The 26-year-old Portuguese international with 32 caps needed some encouragement to sign a deal with Wolves last summer, and they will now be regretting that their persuasiveness and contract offer hadn't been quite as powerful. Guedes played in just 13 Premier League games for Wolves, producing just 1 goal and 1 assist while struggling to fit in both on and off the field. Wolves will have a difficult time recouping as much of their almost £30 million investment in Guedes this summer given his less successful record at Benfica where he has suffered with injuries. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and make sure of course that you are subscribed in order to receive any future videos.